The smell of burnt jollof rice usually meant a celebration was nearing its peak in the Shonibar compound. But today, the scorched scent hanging over the veranda felt like an omen. Elizabeth sat on a low wooden stool, her fingers tracing the chipped paint of her suitcase, the one she had lived out of for 4 years in Manchester. Her return was supposed to be a surprise, a grand reunion timed for the month of her wedding, but the silence that greeted her at the airport should have been her first clue. Now staring at the closed door of her family home, she felt a vibration in her chest that had nothing to do with the humidity of Lagos. It was the sound of a house holding its breath. Please, stay with me as I tell you this story, for sometimes the people we leave behind grow into strangers while we are busy building a future for them. Within minutes of her arrival, the tension broke, but not with a hug. It broke with the sight of Favour, her childhood friend, walking across the compound wearing a lace wrapper that Elizabeth recognized instantly. It was the heavy, sapphire blue aso-ebi Elizabeth had selected via WhatsApp months ago for her own bridal train. Favour didn't see her at first. She was busy adjusting the gold head tea of a small toddler who stumbled at her feet. When Favour finally looked up and saw Elizabeth standing there, the tray of garden eggs in her hand didn't drop. That would be too theatrical. Instead, she gripped the plastic rim until her knuckles turned the color of ash, her eyes darting toward the main house where Michael was laughing loudly at something Alfred had said. Elizabeth didn't move. She watched how Favour's hand instinctively went to the gold band on her finger, a habit of a woman who was still getting used to the weight of a new status. The betrayal didn't land as a single blow. It arrived in the way the neighbors, like Becky from the hair salon next door, suddenly found interest in the dot on their shoes when they saw Elizabeth. It was the realization that the letters from Michael had grown shorter, not because he was busy with the logistics of the upcoming nuptials, but because he was already living the life they had planned with the woman Elizabeth had trusted to look after him. The struggle of being the one who leaves is the belief that the world stands still in your absence. Elizabeth had spent 4 years eating cold sandwiches in library basements, sending every spare pound back home to help Michael finish his engineering certifications, believing she was watering a garden. She didn't know she was merely providing the shade for someone else to bloom. When Eniola, Elizabeth's younger sister, finally emerged from the kitchen, her eyes were red-rimmed. She didn't offer a greeting. She simply took Elizabeth's hand, her palm sweaty and shaking, and led her toward the parlor where the elders were already gathering. The room was dim, cooled only by a struggling ceiling fan that ticked like a metronome. Badmos, the family patriarch, sat in his usual velvet armchair, his cane propped against his knee. Michael was there, looking prosperous in a way Elizabeth hadn't seen in photos. He looked like a man who had eaten well and slept soundly. He didn't jump up. He didn't apologize. He simply looked at Elizabeth with a weary kind of pity, as if her arrival was an inconvenience to a settled matter. The cost of Elizabeth's ambition had been her presence, and in a culture that prizes the here and now, her absence had been treated like a debt. Favour had been the one to bring Michael soup when he was ill. Favour was the one who sat with his mother, Frances, when she had a high blood pressure scare. Favour had filled the physical space Elizabeth had left behind, and by the time the wedding invitations were being printed, the name on the card had simply been swapped. It was a cold, logical replacement. As the meeting began, the air grew thick. The shame wasn't on Michael or Favour. The community had already blessed their union. The shame, Elizabeth realized with a sinking heart, was being placed on her for coming back and disturbing the peace. She sat on the edge of a plastic chair, the same kind she had sat in during her send-off party years ago, and realized that her mistake wasn't going away to study. Her mistake was believing that loyalty was a debt that gathered interest over time. In reality, loyalty is a fire. If you aren't there to throw wood on it, it goes out, and people will move to whatever heart is still burning. The days that followed were a masterclass in the quiet cruelty of a small community. Elizabeth stayed in the back room of her father's house, listening to the muffled sounds of Favour and Michael's life in the apartment 3 blocks away. The apartment Elizabeth's tuition savings had helped furnish. She watched through the window as Tayo, Michael's younger brother, ran errands for Favour, he carrying heavy bags of groceries with the same enthusiasm he used to reserve for Elizabeth. Loyalty, she observed, shifted like the tide, and she was currently stranded on the rocks. One afternoon, Michael came to see her. He didn't come to beg for forgiveness. He came to ask for his freedom from the guilt he claimed she was projecting onto the family. They sat on the back veranda, the sound of a distant generator humming in the background. Michael picked at a loose thread on his shirt, a shirt Elizabeth had sent him from a shop in Manchester. He explained that a man cannot marry a ghost, and for 4 years, that is what she had been. A voice on a grainy video call, a set of bank transfers, a dream that felt increasingly disconnected from the reality of his daily struggles. He spoke with an honesty that was almost more painful than a lie. He admitted that when Favour first started coming over, it was to talk about how much they both missed Elizabeth. But grief for an absent friend is a lonely thing, and eventually, they stopped talking about her and started talking about themselves. He told her how Favour had been there when he lost his job, how she had used her small savings from her tailoring business to keep him afloat, while Elizabeth was busy writing her thesis. He made his choice feel like a necessity, a survival tactic in a world that doesn't wait for long-distance promises. Elizabeth sat in the silence that followed, her hands folded in her lap. She thought about the nights she had cried herself to sleep because she missed the smell of Lagos rain, the times she had skipped meals to make sure Michael had enough to pay his rent. She felt a surge of anger, but it was trapped behind a wall of exhaustion. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the engagement ring, which he had never actually asked back for, at his face. She simply asked him if he was happy. Michael didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the dusty yard, watched a stray dog pick through some rubbish, and said that he was stable. In their world, stability was often mistaken for love. The shift in the story's gravity happened during the preparations for the community's annual harvest festival. Favour, now the rightful wife of a rising engineer, was expected to lead the women's committee. She moved with an air of unearned authority, barking orders at younger girls and preening in the reflected light of Michael's growing status. But the foundation of her house was built on the property Elizabeth had technically paid for. Elizabeth had the receipts, the wire transfers to the landlord, the invoices for the furniture, the documents for the small plot of land Michael had bought in their name. While Elizabeth sat in her silence, she began to realize that dignity isn't just about how you carry yourself. It's about what you refuse to carry for others. She saw how Favour's pride was a fragile thing, propped up by the community's collective amnesia. Everyone knew the truth, but they chose the easy version of it because Michael and Favour were there and Elizabeth was not. It was a social contract written in pencil, and Elizabeth realized she held the eraser. She decided to attend the harvest festival, not as a victim, but as a witness. She dressed in a simple, elegant gown she had bought in London, something that didn't scream for attention, but commanded it. As she walked through the marketplace, the whispers followed her like a trail of smoke. She saw Alfred and Badmus sharing a drink at a stall, their faces hardening when they saw her. They expected her to be hidden away, a stain they could eventually wash out. By showing up, she was forcing them to remember the cost of their stability. The tension reached a boiling point when Favour, emboldened by a few glasses of palm wine and the cheers of her peers, made the mistake of addressing Elizabeth directly in front of the elders. She thanked Elizabeth for the contributions she had made to Michael's life, framing them as a sisterly gift rather than the life savings of a fiancé. The audacity of the comment hung in the air, thick and sweet like overripe fruit. Elizabeth felt the eyes of the village on her sister Eniola, the nosy Becky, even the skeptical Frances. This was the crossroads. She could choose the path of the long-suffering Christian woman and nod, or she could speak the truth that lived in the silence. Elizabeth didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She waited until the music from a nearby speaker died down, leaving only the sound of the wind in the palm fronds. She looked at Favour, then at Michael, who was looking at his feet. She reached into her small clutch bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper, not a legal document, but a handwritten ledger she had kept of every penny she had sent home. And she didn't pass it around. She simply held it, the white paper stark against the evening shadows. She spoke of the land Michael had bought, the land where he was currently building a larger house for Favour. She revealed, with the measured tone of a woman recounting a history book, that the title deed was still in her name, as she had been the primary depositor and the one who signed the final papers via power of attorney through her father before she left. The crowd went still. The stability Michael had boasted of was built on Elizabeth's soil. The punishment for Favour and Michael wasn't a sudden eviction or a legal battle. It was the public stripping of their masks. In a community where reputation is the only currency that matters, they were suddenly bankrupt. Michael, the proud engineer, was revealed to be a man who had built his life on his ex-fiancée's back. Favour, the virtuous wife who had saved him, was shown to be a squatter in another woman's dream. The isolation began almost instantly. The elders, sensing a shift in the moral wind, began to distance themselves. Badmo stood up and walked away without finishing his drink. Becky stopped whispering and started staring at Favour with a new, sharp scrutiny. The reckoning was material too. Elizabeth didn't want the land to build a house. She wanted the value of what she had lost. She quietly informed the family that she would be selling the plot to a developer from the city. Michael's half-finished walls would be torn down. The stable life they had built was literally going to be leveled. Favour's face, which had been so full of triumph, crumpled into a mask of pure terror. She realized that she had married a man who owned nothing, and she had traded a lifelong friendship for a house made of sand. In the final days before Elizabeth returned to the UK to finish her doctorate, she saw Michael one last time. He looked smaller, the prosperous glow replaced by a great tint of anxiety. He tried to apologize then, but Elizabeth realized the apology wasn't for her. It was for the loss of his comfort. She didn't hate him. Hatred requires energy, and she was saving hers for her own life. She left the compound as she had arrived with her suitcase, but this time the weight was different. The story of the Shonibar compound became a cautionary tale, whispered in the markets and over garden fences. People talked about the girl who went away and the friends who thought distance meant disappearance. The new normal for Michael and Favour was a life of quiet desperation, living in a rented room, constantly reminded by the empty lot down the road of what happens when you try to harvest a field you didn't plant. Dignity is not found in what we take from others, but in what we are willing to walk away from to keep our souls intact. If you were in Elizabeth's shoes, would you have sold the land to start over, or would you have kept it just to remind them every day of what they tried to take? I am curious to know where you are joining us from today. Please leave your city or country in the comments below so I can greet you. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe and stay a while. There is more stories to share with you. Thank you for watching.